2NURFM.com, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Oh my, what a busy time it's been in the world of politics. Let's catch up with it all. Joining us from the University of Newcastle, Associate Professor in Politics, Dr. Jim Joes. What a big day yesterday, Jim.
Yes, it certainly was, Dave. There was a major, shall we say, leadership issue. I mean, but it's been a volatile time across the political spectrum. I mean, just very briefly.
Let's go back to Northern Territory for a
the
moment.
Northern
You touched on
Territory.
that last week with us.
Yes. When I spoke last week, the Chief Minister had been deposed. A day later, he and the new Chief Minister had more or less kissed and made up, and the new Chief Minister became the Deputy Chief Minister, and the deposed Chief Minister was returned as Chief Minister. So it's sort of back to normal in that space. In Queensland, it looks like we'll have a minority Labor government, although currently the Liberal National Party is not stepping aside from its sort of hold on government, so there's an issue for the Governor of Queensland. So things are pretty volatile in a sense that nothing is panning out quite how people expect. And yesterday we had Tony Abbott.
He remains leader. He has the numbers.
Yes, he has the numbers at present, and once he'd moved the spill date forward by a day, it looked, I think, he was pretty confident that he was going to hold the numbers, because the challengers to him were not willing to challenge until there had been a leadership spill. And it's up to the incumbent leader to basically say, I declare the...
Nobody really stood forward and said, I'm challenging, did they?
No, and the two perhaps most obvious contenders, Malcolm Turnbull, Julie Bishop, neither of them wanted to be seen to be the ones precipitating this, because I think if you'll forgive the metaphor, the ghost of Julia Gillard and the Labor era is something that is being both invoked by people in the Liberal Party and also a memory that they...
Could it be that the Liberal Party didn't want to be seen as following that same track as the Labor Party?
I think that's a reasonable comment. They're very unhappy, members of the party, the backbench in particular, because they're the ones who stand to lose their seats in many respects. If an election was called tomorrow, many of them would find themselves struggling to be returned to Parliament. So they're concerned about their jobs, and they're concerned about the ability of the government to survive, or the party to survive an election. The outcome of the spill, yes, Tony Abbott won 61 to 39. He only needs 12 people to turn against him and things would look very, very different. He's come out with some rhetoric, but I fail to see that there's a lot of substance, Dave. And what I mean by that is that he's saying, I'm changed, I can change, but he's still talking very much in slogans. So, for example, he talks about good government starts today. And, of course, people have picked him up on, well, what happened for the previous 18 months? Was that not good government? It's like he's still stuck in this, if I can get a 3-word slogan out, I can turn things around.
What about the latest that Malcolm Turnbull should be banished to the backbenches?
Well, that's on the supposition that Malcolm Turnbull has been fomenting the issues, and we don't have any clear evidence, and everything he's done publicly has largely been supportive, although he did get a couple of little digs in during the process, one in particular about when Tony Abbott shifted the date forward for the spill. Malcolm Turnbull mentioned that, this is a captain's pick, sort of just invoking the embarrassment that Tony Abbott had over the captain's pick framework for knighthoods and so forth. What I think is really important here is to understand that the Australian political culture is not a culture of extremes when it comes to its national government and the sorts of policies it expects it to pursue. And the Abbott-led government has been very much driven by, shall we say, a much more extreme version of, in political terms, the neoliberal framework that we've been experiencing for the past 25 years, initiated and brought in various ways by the Hawke-Keating years, embedded even more solidly during the Howard years. And what that means, Dave, very quickly, is that the market is seen as the driver of policy rather than the government. So governments work with the market to bring about decisions and outcomes. So a lot of the decision making, shall we say, a lot of the policies are organised around market choices and market delivery. Governments play less and less of a role in implementing and delivering policy. This is now left to the market. So the Abbott government came in, or the Abbott-led Liberal Party came in with a much more, they went to the election with a very centre-of-the-road type sets of policies, and no, nothing will change dramatically. Yes, we'll stay committed to a whole range of things that people have been used to. And then within weeks of being in government, they made quite radical shifts, and their budget really became an extreme expression of market-driven policy. And the outcome of that has been chaos in terms of people not being happy, the opinion polls going dramatically against the government, and then we get policy flip-flops. We get the Prime Minister saying one thing one day and then one thing the next, or a minister saying one thing one day and then something opposite the next day.
Well,
so,
an interesting day yesterday. I'm sure there'll be more interesting ones ahead of us.
Oh, yes, and I think the Prime Minister, Dave, has really got his work cut out for him, and he really needs to go back and reread the nature of Australian politics and think about keeping the party more in the centre. Most of the voters are going to accept that, yes, a market-driven sets of solutions are fine, so long as they're not sort of as radically and as extreme as what we've had in the past, and bring the budget-type issues back into a more, a more equitable and a fairer approach. Most people don't object to paying a little bit more, provided it's seen as reasonably fair. Last year's budget was really unfair, and I think Tony Abbott's sort of acknowledged it. Whether he's acknowledged it enough to make the next budget responsible and fair, rather than in the extreme way that it came out last year. So we'll have to wait and see on that one, Dave.
Only about 11 weeks away from our next budget being delivered. We'll talk more about that as it approaches. And we're looking at politics. Associate Professor in Politics from the University of Newcastle, Dr. Jim Joes, back next Tuesday at 2NURFM.